CNN military analyst Rick Francona, the former U.S. military attaché to Syria, joining us from Washington State today. Colonel Francona, how do you explain what Turkish strategy is at this point?
I think the Turks are taking the long view. Erdogan, who has just survived a coup attempt, which has actually strengthened his domestic position, now feels emboldened, and he's looking for what's going to happen after the Syrian problem is resolved. And it will be resolved someday. It's going to take a while, but there will be a solution, political solution in Syria, and he wants to make sure that Turkish interests are protected. And Turkish interest, in Erdogan's mind, is to make sure that the Kurds do not come out of this as an autonomous or an independent region. So he's putting as much pressure as he can on the Kurds right now. And if that involves helping the anti-Syrian, anti-regime rebels, so be it. If that involves fighting ISIS, so be it. But his goal is a non-Kurdish threat from his southern border. How
long can you see Turkish forces on Syrian sovereign soil?
You know, the Turks have done this before. They've done it in Syria. They've done it in Iraq. And the Turks have a pretty straightforward strategy. They go in, they do what they want to do, and they withdraw. And they withdraw to the border, and they maintain that border, knowing that they could always go back. I think they're getting bogged down now. This was supposed to be in and out. They tried it, and now they've lost troops inside of Syria, and now they're facing not only ISIS, as they've claimed they're doing, but they're also fighting the Kurds. So they're in there fighting people who are allied with the United States, people who are anti-United States, and they're inserting themselves in the middle. And I think Erdogan may not realize just the tactical situation he's in.
All right, well, he's clearly discussing that with Washington at present. I want to bring in a quote from Hassan at this point. He's a fellow at a think tank on the Middle East. In an op-ed in CNN.com recently, referring mostly to Washington, he writes, quote, and this is specifically on Syria, policy inconsistencies, intermittent support for the rebels, confused messaging, and the absence of strong international leadership have contributed to this protracted conflict and allowed space for regional and international actors to rip the country apart. That is fair to say, isn't it?
I wish I would have written that. I couldn't have put better words on that. He's explaining exactly what is happening in Syria. And unfortunately, without that international leadership from many parties, we're seeing this situation. I saw the report, your discussion you had, with Nick earlier about what's going on in Aleppo. We've never seen anything on the scale of Aleppo. And as you said, there's no real early solution for this.
I think it was recently described by one of my colleagues, our senior international correspondent, Clarissa Ward, as an apocalyptic catastrophe, what's going on in Aleppo. Rick, in what has been widely criticised as failed policy in Syria, Washington, it does seem, is sort of raising the game to a certain extent. We are clearly seeing a ratcheting up of coalition efforts, specifically against ISIS, both in Iraq and in Syria. Has policy changed?
I don't know if the policy's changed. I think that there's a realization that what we've been doing up until now in Syria is not working. And I think the United States has shifted all of its, most of its effort right now to support the Iraqis in the retaking of Mosul. That has to happen first. If you look at the sequencing of the events here, I think the plan now is, instead of trying to fight two separate little operations, one in Iraq, one in Syria, we're going to pour a lot of support into helping the Iraqis retake Mosul. And once we retake Mosul, then push ISIS back into Syria and then concentrate the efforts on Syria. I think what they're doing is the euphemism is kicking the can down the road, because no one has a real plan for Syria yet, but people can see an outcome in Iraq.
Well, perhaps that is the reason why, in the end, in Daria, a district just outside of Damascus, the rebels have chucked it in. The government say they've surrendered. The rebels there, or those who were left in what was this sort of iconic sort of rebellion town, have now decided that it's just not worth it and are being rehoused. How do you read the implications, for example, of that move? We can certainly see how the Syrian government is going to play it.
Well, and Daria, I used to live right in the next suburb there, and That's the wrong place to have a stand against the Syrian government. There's no way they could have kept that. I'm surprised they lasted as long as they did. But the mere fact that the Syrian government made a deal with them, and the deal they got wasn't bad. They've had worse deals that they've taken in the past. So the rebels actually got a pretty good deal out of this. They were able to relocate with their weapons. I was really surprised the Syrians went for that. And the Syrians are feeling emboldened right now. The Syrian government, Assad's got all the support from the Iranians and the Russians. I'm surprised he made that kind of deal. So he's not feeling real secure either. He's watching what's going on in the north, and even he doesn't know how this is going to turn out. The people in the driver's seat right now, Becky, are the Iranians, the Russians, and the Turks. And I think we need to make sure that we get a seat at that table as well.
Fascinating. Sir, it's always a pleasure having you on. Thank you for your time this Sunday.